All right. Well, we have some audio feedback problems here. What am I doing?
You probably need to mute yourself.
Make sure you have volume down. Got it. Okay, no more audio problems. We are ready to go this time. So thank you all for coming tonight for this budget committee update. I think before we do anything, we should probably just start off with quick introductions. We see each other kind of once or twice a year, and some of you haven't been in for a while. So start with Brady Strutz, and we'll just go around the room and if you can just kind of state your role in the district, and your name would obviously be helpful also.
Right, hey, I'm Brady Strutz, I'm the interim COO.
I'm Steve Allen, I am HR Part A.
Amanda Hollenberg, HR.
She's an A+.
I'm Aaron Downs, superintendent.
Derek Thomas, I'm have a daughter in school, actually just graduated last year, and citizen of the community.
Matt Kaufman, I have two kids at Middleton Elementary, and I am a budget committee.
Ben Spidell. I have 3 kids in school for assistant, and my wife's coming in at Hereford Road. Figure it out.
So Ryan Dunlap's a part of the budget committee. I also have 3 kids in the district, almost at all 3 schools. Next year will be all 3 schools. This year is just 2.
Gary Bennett, I'm the CFO of the district.
I am Bozeman, and I do have one at elementary and school, high school.
There you go. Ivy Hawkins, school board.
Hans Bowler, School Board. Matt Jordan, School Board.
Marlene Carroll, Assistant Superintendent.
Excellent.
I'm Danny.
Okay, so we'll just jump in. So this is really a fiscal update in preparation for our official budget committee meeting, which will come about a month from now. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So tonight, we'll take a look at the role of the budget committee. We'll take a look at our finances over the last couple of years. And you have a paper copy of this in front of you if that's helpful at all. Sometimes the numbers are a little bit small on the screen. We'll take a little bit better look ahead at 25-26, everything from the legislature to enrollment to kind of revenue, expense, and fund balance projections, and then we'll kind of take a look at the budget process going forward. But this is the idea of this to get you all some good background and in a place where when we present the budget, you have some of the background that went into it and some of the numbers behind it. So first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about the role of the budget committee. First of all, I want to thank you for your service. It's an important role for the citizens to be involved in the budget making process and to have a role. And so we appreciate you taking the time to do that. It provides us with a different perspective and helps keep us sharp, which is kind of the intent of these. And so it's really a means for the public to participate in the process. You will receive the budget message in the budget document. You'll actually review and approve the proposed budget. And you'll also take comment from citizens. You'll have to have an open comment section when we do our official budget committee meeting. The actual actions you take will be to review the budget at the major fund and function levels, and we can talk about what that looks like when we actually get to that point. Ensure the budget's in line with district goals. It is reasonable based on past history and experience. And you'll actually then approve the budget and set the tax rate. Once the budget committee approves the budget, it goes up for public review for a number of days, has to be posted in the newspaper, and then it will be adopted in a board budget hearing at a later time. We'll talk about the timeline for that going forward. And there are a few things outside the scope of the budget committee. There we go. And you can see those things on the board. Those things on the board are decisions. Some of those are for the board of directors, and some of those are left for staff. Some things outside the scope of the budget committee. Any questions about that before we jump in and get into some of the stuff? Okay. So we'll first take a look at the forecast for this year, and we'll go through a few different slides on this. Really, when we look at the strengths for this year, just the local option in general supports about 51 staff members in the district. And I honestly can't fathom doing what we're doing running a district with 51 less people in it. It's monumental. And so just another thanks to the voters for their generosity and willing to support us. It actually produced about $160,000 more in revenue this year than we anticipated. So that's always a good thing when that comes a little bit high. And it just prevented just brought us a lot of stability and really helpful. On another strength, our fund balance is going to increase again a little bit this year. Our ending fund balance, at least, is projected to. And in addition to increasing fund balance, we're also setting some reserves aside as transfers to capital projects for things like turf field replacement, curriculum, things of that nature. So that bus replacement, so that's a good thing too. So we're building reserves outside of the general fund as well, which could be pretty helpful. Our challenges, which I'd imagine you'd hear from most industries, our costs are generally rising faster than the revenue we have coming in. And that's true on the salary front and on the materials and supplies front. We can take a little bit deeper look at that. Enrollment, we have declining births in the state of Oregon, as I think most of you probably know. I have some numbers that kind of show what it looks like locally for us. And, you know, we have giant senior classes going out and smaller kindergarten classes coming in, and we lose 438 seniors and gain 243 kinders. You got a lot of ground to make up in the middle, and so that's a bit of a challenge for us. We had some pockets of large class sizes, although overall we had some really attractive class sizes. There were places where they were higher than we would like, and people really felt the squeeze on that. And then just the lack of state funding for high cost disabilities. There's a big expense there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on as well. But those are kind of the challenges and strengths. Any questions about that? I would just say, I should have said this in the beginning, but this is more of a discussion than a me presenting kind of thing. I mean, it's obviously me presenting, but if you have questions, don't hesitate to just jump in, ask, comments, whatever it is. It's meant to be kind of, we're sitting like this and not at the dais for a reason, but it's more of a conversation. So feel free to chime in when you feel obligated.
Great. This may be a question for later, but is there an update on the additional funding for high cost disability?
That'll come later on. We've got a legislative update we'll go through.
Maybe one more question. So is there any of these challenges here that are noted or Sherwood's unique from other neighboring districts, or are these all similar challenges from the neighboring districts? No?
I can't say for sure about class sizes, but I would guess they're having the same problems. The other three are certainly surrounding districts having problems with. Yeah. And I think class sizes too. It's hard not to have pockets of high class sizes when you have a small schools where you get into a situation where you have, 64 fourth graders. You're either looking at 2 classes of 32, which is too high, or 3 classes of 20, 21 or 22, which is kind of unaffordably low. And so you get put in this position where it's just a challenging thing. And so those are common things.
I would say I went to a meeting on Friday with superintendents, and absolutely it is. And if they aren't now, they are next year and the next 2 years. One of the things that folks talked about, they are, a lot of people around us are 8 to 10 to 15 to 18 million, kind of looking ahead. And so they are doing a lot of riffing right now with staff, which they're trying to talk to people, not about class sizes the last couple of years or even, but like 4 or 5 years ago, going back to some of those class sizes. So it's a difficult conversation because we all have the same desire for class size and we want the same thing. But I do know some of our neighbors, on latest was on Friday, everyone was kind of saying it's going way up. And so I think we are an outlier in that, even though we have these pockets of some spaces that are higher than we ever want. We're going to be an outlier compared to some of our colleagues and friends.
I think in a different time, it would be a good idea to talk about the board meeting. What is like ideal class sizing look like? What are we talking about when we have that in mind? Because I think, for a family, they think, oh, 18 sounds great, and I agree. I want that for my kids too. But talking about what is a realistic service level that we would love to see so that people just kind of have an understanding of like what our expectation actually would be.
Maybe there's a question for Dr. Daniels. Are you looking, I would assume that you're going to start seeing larger class sizes, start seeing burnout, if you're not seeing it already. Are you working on that substitute pool, or how does that look as far as doing that to supplement?
Yeah, I think we we are actually studying this all the time, and in fact, we meet about this weekly, and one of the things we talked about today is we actually looked at our teacher absences over the last year and compared it to previous year, and Steve and Amanda were able to get me back some data today on this, and we are nearly at 100% fill rate for subs right now, and we have the highest teacher attendance rate that we've had in the last several years. And so some of that is actually just really, the hard work of the staff and making efforts to be a part of that, but we absolutely worry about that. We worry about that across the system. We do that specifically with our newer teachers, 0 to 5 years. It's really difficult with over 55% of them not remaining in the profession across the nation.
Right.
It's really a concern of how do we support them early on. And so we're really taking a proactive approach to ensure we go with it. So I think we, at the same time, we do want to make sure that those subs have that we're doing what we can.
So on to the numbers. So just a little history here, and this is actually a good history. In this bottom left-hand corner here, you can see, so this first column is 2022 actuals, 23 and 23 actual, and the next column over. So 2022-23 is the year in which we discovered just about the day school was going to start, that we had a significant financial challenge, made a bunch of reductions, eked out the year with just under $1 million in ending fund balance. Voters passed a generous levy the following year due to the hard work of a lot of people in this room. And we were able to make a significant improvement in our fund balance and reduce some debts and other funds. And then you can see that that's going to go up again a bit more this year. So that's really good. We set a target when we passed the levy to hit 3.8% of our ending fund balance to be 3.8% of revenues at the end of 24-25. We're going to come pretty close to getting there. We might be just a bit under 3.7%, but we're kind of on track to hit that. So this is a good celebration here of being in a strong financial position over the past couple of years. There's a couple of interesting things I'd want to just bring some attention to on here. The first, the box at the top up here in the top right is $797,000 unfavorable. That's just a sign of our state school fund. That's state school fund money. And that had to do with our enrollment being lower than we budgeted. We expected a growth in enrollment, and we actually had a little decline in enrollment this year. Our demographers were way off. And so that's why we made some reductions early in the year, because we knew that. Or over the summer, we didn't rehire positions over the summer. We held them in advance, and we saw the enrollment was coming in low. We just didn't hire them. So you can see that the revenue there of being $800,000 lower than we expected, a little bit unlucky. We also got a little bit lucky when you see this associated payroll cost and the expenditures being $718,000 in our favor. You may recall we budgeted $800,000 for classified unemployment, and it didn't end up costing us nearly that much. And so it cost us more than the difference between $800,000 and that number, but that's a big relief. And so we kind of got a little bit fortunate in those two things canceled each other out. Sometimes you plan perfectly, and sometimes things go your way, and it's kind of a balance of both. This way, one went against us, one went for us, so that's good. The couple other anomalies on here. You see this $872,000 projected in other sources. You might recall we had a little incident in Middleton last year for an ice storm. We had that insurance claim ended up being over $1 million, all said and done. And so we paid some of it last year, but we paid about $775,000 of it this year. So we brought in a bunch of revenue from the insurance company. It showed up on that line, which is a bunch more insurance money than we thought. We paid it out down below under purchase services. That probably needs to be moved to capital outlay, but nonetheless, I just wanted to see the offset in that revenue was from the insurance company, and then a payout to the company that did the mitigation services for us. Any questions about any of that?
So then our forecast for headcount was better than or more accurate than the data from the project one?
Theirs was higher than ours, and we chose a number sort of in between ours and theirs. Which ended up, we came in lower than ours, too. We came in lower than both of them, but we picked the number between them. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about what's coming up here. So that's the general fund.
I was just gonna mention, you said we got a little bit lucky, but that's also a lot of your really hard work to make sure that we come in on target. So I know there was some confusion when we talked about it in January and talked about the possibility that there might be a deficit. I know I talked to a handful of people who worried like, oh, here we go again with the school district, but what that was us trying to get out ahead of it, plan for it, and make sure that we ended the year in a favorable position.
And we did manage the budget closely this year. I would agree with that. And we were prudent, and we also knew when we budgeted for the classified unemployment, that was the absolute extreme end of what that would be, and we knew that was a cushion going in. That was a known that we all talked about, and so. You're right, it was, we did plan our way through that. It just didn't play out exactly like we thought it would, but it never does. Okay, any more about the general fund?
Real quickly, Gary, you said the other sources of revenue, the insurance revenue there, that's offset in capital outlays.
Yes,
Okay. So you said the total bill for the Milton Bearson, is that about $1 million?
it was just over $1 million.
Okay.
Just got 7 figures, which sort of surprised all of us. Any other questions before I move on? I just don't want to. Okay, so moving on to the special revenue funds. These are funds that contain all kinds of different things. They're largely grant dollars. They also contain like our athletics funds, student body funds, some other capital funds, which I can talk briefly about. And you see this big jump in ending fund balance from 2022-23 to 2023-24. For those of you who were on the board of the budget committee at the time, and those of you who weren't may remember that not only when we were in 2022-23 did we find ourselves with a real challenge in our general fund, we found that our general fund borrowed money from the special revenue funds to the tune of about $1.5 million between athletics, nutrition services, Medicaid claiming. And so last year, not only did we increase our ending fund balance by about $1.5 million, we paid down about $1.5 million with the debts to 200 funds. So that's why that's part of the reason why that jump in ending fund balance is so substantial in the special revenue funds. And part of that is just additional revenue collected from a couple main sources. One is the construction excise tax, which is a tax on builders to compensate schools for capital goods, capital expenditures related to more kids coming to school. And part of it's from Senate Bill 1149 funds, which is the energy efficiency fund. So for example, when we built the new high school, we put in LED lights at the high school. And by putting in LED lights, we qualified for, it goes to public purchase charge from PGE that goes into the pool and we get paid back a certain amount each month for that. And so those two funds really drove that. So good, healthy balance in there, going in the right direction. And in there is about, embedded in that balance, there's a couple funds that you should just know a little bit about. The construction excise tax fund, and which can only be used for capital projects, has about 1.4 million in it. And this SB 1149, which is the energy efficiency fund, has about 700 grand in it. So that's two pretty substantial balances we can use for capital projects. They have some restrictions on them, but not significant. And those can't be used to hire staff, by the way. Those are capital expenditure. Important to know about. Moving on to the debt service funds, I won't spend a lot of time here, other than that our fund balance looks pretty healthy. We want to our projected fund balance. We want to have about $500,000 in there at the end of the year, so that gives us when the payment is due in May. That gives us about the revenue we need to pay it. Then we collect a little bit more revenue in June, July, and August to go back into this year. I think one thing that's worth noting for this group and for the community is that when we passed the bond that built the new high school, we promised voters, we told voters it would be about $4.20 per $1,000 of assessed value. That's the price we told them. That's what was on the ballot measure. And we were conservative in that. And in 2021, we were at 3.83%, so significantly under. Then we went down to 3.72%. Or 3.72 per thousand, we're now at 3.37 per thousand, so it keeps continually dropping down. So from 425, 420, which was the promise, we're down to 337, and I expect that to continue to creep lower. So that's good news for our taxpayers. And good news for the folks that had nothing to do with it, who built that budget and planned that out, and we're conservative in those growth estimates, so that's good for all parties involved. And then finally, our capital projects funds. You can see our ending fund balance is just sort of slowly declining. We didn't spend a ton of money in capital projects this year. The biggest expense under supply and materials was curriculum adoptions. And other than that, we haven't spent a ton of capital goods. We had a few kind of capital repairs that Brady's team made, but for the most part, we haven't spent a ton of money in this. We're expecting to bring in a little bit of revenue in this from the sale of the easement to the city, which you voted on in consent agenda, I think last month, and one other easement we're working on negotiating with Clean Water Services. So we expect to bring in some revenue into this fund, which is generally only interest at this point in time because we have no bonds or anything like that. So that's good news. Good to see some revenue come in and not a ton of expenses going out.
So what's your plan for getting that big
What do you mean?
in terms of, are we gonna? Do we have capital projects in the future that we're looking at using those funds?
We do. We've got a few things. We've got, for one, our part of our capital goods were set aside for technology, and about $4 million of that is technology funds. And so we'll have to do a complete revamp of all staff laptops, all student devices. We've got some networking stuff to do. That'll be a big chunk of it. And we're actually going to have a point where we have to try to stretch that money as far as possible and build up other capital reserve funds, because we have things like turf field replacements, which are 700 grand a piece that are coming up, and we've got ongoing bus replacement. And when these funds are gone, we're going to have to be funding capital projects out of the general fund or pass another bond. Those are going to be our two options. And so what we're trying to do, and you'll see it in the transfer section, is transfer funds from the general fund into reserve funds, so that number one, we've got a line item in our budget for turf replacement and for curriculum adoptions and things like that. And also that we're building reserves at the same time. And what we'll do is we're planning to increase the amounts of those transfers by like 50 grand a year per category. So we're building a bigger line item and saving money so that we don't hit this cliff at the end of our bond fund and save some reserve. So I know it looks like a lot of money, but we'll burn through that pretty quickly with a couple of big projects.
So that was kind of my question, because sorry. Okay. Yeah, because I know we've been talking about that with the bond, being part of that bond being actually these curricular and other kinds of materials that are being using. So like, I get like why we're making it, but what's the long-term strategy to be able to, I mean, I know some of it's turnover, it's like every 4 years you replace computers or whatever, so some of it's turnover. But some of it is maybe not much of a turnover. Is that, I'm trying to understand what that strategy is, because once the municipal bond drops, we no longer have the extra funds for use for that. Are you suggesting, I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
Yeah, totally.
Are you suggesting that like it's the 6 million essentially right now that we're talking about, that's essentially to replace that and then hopefully rebuild it back up for the X number of years in the future? Is that kind of what we're talking about?
Basically, is that before we expend those funds down, we need to build up a reserve, because if we go through those funds and haven't built a reserve, then we're gonna hit a cliff. And so we're adding to our reserves each year by making transfers out of the general fund, and we'll make those bigger and bigger. So we're essentially saving money. So when we run out of bond funds, we have a reserve fund. And then the board at the time will have to make a decision whether to go out for another bond. When the time comes, there will come a time in a few years, 4 or 5 years, where we could take another bond without raising people's taxes. And we could use that to pay for some of these capital goods, or we can pay for them out of the general fund. But we're planning around a time horizon that we don't hit a cliff and find ourselves with serious capital needs and no fund, because that's how you end up with major budget reductions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense.
I do have a question.
Shoot.
First, one of them is the sleight of hand you just said.
we can pass on the bond and not cost any taxpayer money. How do you do that?
He said not
Because
They're
raise
already paying
taxes.
it.
Huh?
He said not raise
Not
taxes.
raise taxes.
If we don't pass another one, then taxes are reduced. So if we pass another one, then they just.
But you'd have to pass on the
You
bond
have to go to the voters, the board would have to decide if that's what they wanted to do.
if you need money. Okay, all right, so that answers that. It's just confused. Bonds are for buildings, right? Can bonds be used for all this tech stuff and computers? And I thought they were only for buildings.
There was a law passed 2014, maybe something along those lines, but certainly prior to our last bond in 2017, 2018, that allowed, expanded the definition of capital goods.
Okay.
And so we could buy curriculum, technology, things of that nature.
So, and the last question, which is what I wanted to start with, is why is it important to separate these things in different categories? Out of the general fund into a capital projects fund, this and build a reserve here, this different than reserve here. Why is that strategically important? I don't quite follow that logic.
Because you're setting aside funds for a specific purpose, which would be like turf field replacement. And so the board would be saying, we're gonna take this $150,000, put it in this account for turf replacement, so that it doesn't just get lumped in with the general fund and spent for general operations. You're saving it for a future project. Now, the board could also vote to move money from the capital, from the turf replacement fund back into the general fund and use it to hire teachers. You can certainly do that.
But the bond money has to be used for things that are approved. We can't just be like, we're gonna sweep that back into the general fund and use that for something else. That,
Yes,
you understand
that
that?
I understand.
So
That
that's
part
why
I
they
do.
have to keep track of it.
Okay,
Gary, on the capital budget funds, is there a need, given kind of all the tariff implications and some of the technology outlays as well as some of the construction projects, is there a need to think about and reassess what those impacts might be to some of the fund dollars? So, a broader impact?
We've certainly talked about it. I don't know that we've come up with any great revelation as to how to proceed with kind of the back and forth nature of it. I don't know, Brady, if you have anything to add.
We just know that this is something we're watching closely and there's going to be implications for our capital projects, maybe some of our labor costs and some of our goods, especially our technology. Laser chips. We don't have any clarity on what target we need to hit, but we know that there could be a target that we start finding more.
Yeah. And then broadly, obviously companies across the country are scrambling on that topic as well, and so I'm just curious if there's any assessment you're thinking of, and what is that added cost that we're gonna see, some of the things that we're planning budget for, that might draw down under the result.
Yeah, I guess the strategy is we don't know the answer. We're anxious about it, which I guess makes us budget a little bit more conservatively and pay attention to it, but I don't know beyond that we've taken any super concrete steps. But we're definitely, it's a frequent topic of conversation.
Depending on the group we speak with and the project we're working on and the week of the year, we get a different percentage that we are concerned about. And so that's kind of been a moving target that we've been tracking.
Well, I think it's been really wise to be putting in these extra funds, like we said, for the, because it'd be really easy to say, oh, well, we'll just try to pass another capital bond the next number of years, but if you don't get it, then what, right? So I'm very happy to see that we're planning ahead for that, which would also take care of additional costs. Even if we did pass the bond, we might still need those. So, yeah, I like it.
And realistically, we're gonna struggle to make all of our capital expenditures. I don't know if you recall the presentation about the facilities assessment we had done. But there's $10 or $15 million just in HVAC stuff alone in the next, I think, 7 years. And we will, you can't do all of it, obviously, but there's more to do than we'll have funds to do.
So, under the adopted budget, this is the adopted budget to spend for a budget of 5.6 million. But we're only projected to spend 666. So when we adopt that budget, is that just in case, or is this basically adopting this for all these future things?
Well, we adopted it for all those future things, but some of the feedback I got, I think maybe even from you in the budget committee presentation last year was essentially don't appropriate all that money. And so in this year's budget, we're appropriating a much more major chunk of it, a lot of it sit contingency.
Okay, yeah, because that would be more.
Yeah.
Than actually putting it, that
Putting
you're
it,
gonna spend it
yeah.
during the annual period.
I agree with you. It's been the practice of this district for as long as I've been here, but that's not a good reason to do it.
Yeah. Just to do it.
It's not a good reason.
Love
So,
that answer.
when that was the only answer I had, I figured we'd probably be.
Yeah. Good.
Good. What, the 23-24 other sources revenue, is that the Middleton insurance payment? What, just to the 5.3 million?
You know, I think that had to do with. If you notice, it looks like we had total resources of $12 million. And we actually didn't, and I think it had to do with the way some transfers were made within the fund, and I think it's the way it was showed up from the county standpoint. I honestly don't know what that is off the top of my head. I think that's what it's from.
It's then you see transfers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's just
Okay, no, I was just kind of curious, like.
yeah, what we did was we had a bunch of stuff. We had all of our bond funds in one fund 402. And I thought it made a lot more sense to break it out into here's what is left for curriculum, here's what's left for technology, here's what's left for deferred maintenance and things of that nature. And so I separated it out in the way. Then they show up as transfers like that as revenue and expense.
No, that's, yeah, it's perfect. Just wanted,
Okay.
somebody saw that, not a question.
So moving on to 25-26. So the strengths, again, the local option is really helping us out. 51 full-time equivalent staff paid for by that. We're getting about a 7% increase in our state school fund next year, which is a good thing for us. And there's some important bills, like as Matt mentioned earlier, there's some important bills pending in the legislature around some PERS rate relief and special education, which we'll get into a little bit. Some of the challenges were having reductions or flat funding in state and federal grants. And when you get flat funded in a grant, your labor costs increase, it acts like a cut. Our expenses continue to rise faster than revenues. We're looking at another big senior class heading out the door, and PERS rates are increasing. The base rate was about 3% for us. We think we'll get about 1.6%, 1.68% in PERS rate relief. But that's only a 2-year relief. And PERS rates are expected to go up again next biennium. So that temporary relief may give us help now and lead to a bigger spike 2 years from now. So that's something we're watching pretty carefully. Just from a legislative update. So typically the legislative process starts with the governor's recommended budget, which comes out usually in December. And then in March, we get the co-chairs budget. So the co-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee get together and they put together a budget framework. And this year, the co-chairs budget was essentially unchanged from the governor's recommended budgets. In past years, we've seen an increase in school funding, typically from the governor's recommended budget to the co-chairs budget. There's some technical reasons why that's the case, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because the governor's budget is based on a calculation called the current service level, which was way off base and started artificially low every year, and now that calculation has been fixed. So not a huge surprise, but we were still hoping to see a few more bucks in the co-chair's budget dedicated to education. There is the PERS rate relief bill that I was talking about, which would bring us about $700,000 in each of the next 2 years in PERS rate relief. Passed 28-2 in the Senate. So large bipartisan support.
Gary, is that 700 each year or is that?
Each year, 700 each year. And tends to have good bipartisan support. I imagine it will pass in the House and likely pass in the Senate. The Senate it's already passed in the Senate, likely pass in the House and be signed by the governor. It was really a pocket of money that PERS. It was a PERS side account that they had some money in. They could either dedicate to the whole unfunded liability, or they could dedicate it to a 2-year period. If they dedicated to the whole unfunded liability for K-12, it essentially didn't change our rates hardly at all. If they dedicate it now, we get a pretty good savings in the short run. And there's no cost to anybody for doing this other than not paying down the long-term unfunded liability. So I think that will probably pass, and that will be helpful to us next year. And then we'll have to watch for the for the bigger bump down the road, but we'll take the money now and cross that bridge when we come to it. For my mother-in-law would say we'll burn that bridge when we come to it. I've never understood, she gets every idiom mixed up. She'd be grateful I just said that on the record.
She's actually listening.
It was fine and hilarious, she'd be laughing hysterically. So there's also a couple of sped bills pending. For every student in special education, we get the regular weight we get for one student plus another full student weight. So we essentially get twice the funding for every student on special education. But only if our number of special education kids in our district is under 11% of the population. Everybody over 11%, we don't get any extra funding for, but still provide services to those students and families, which is what we need to do. The 11% cap was put in place in the early 90s. Special education has changed dramatically since then, and there's no district that's anywhere near that number. And so changing, one of the bills pending is to fund that number at a higher level. And to not just take it out of the existing state school fund, right? It's gotta be an existing funding source here, just reshuffling the deck chairs. The other one is increasing the high cost disability fund. The high cost disability fund reimburses us for, we pay the first $30,000 and everything over $30,000 for some students with some really specific needs. The state reimburses us for. That paid out 28 cents on the dollar last year. The most recent year for data was available because the funds set aside to do it were just not indicative of the demand placed on districts. So those are two really positive things that would help quite a bit. And we won't know the outcome of those until after the next revenue forecast on May 14th. When they know how much money they'll have, then they'll start haggling about what to do with it. They don't even have that answered yet until the final forecast comes out in May. But we're watching those closely. They're getting positive traction and hope is that one or both will pass.
Just to speak to add on to that, out of the education bill that you're tracking, there's a large number of bills that there usually are, but these two in particular have received the most public input and public comment and have received a significant amount of questions and legislator meetings, what I like to call it. Does not mean anything other than that is a fact, and so they're getting significant feedback from the education community in a really focused way, in a way that, and I've been working in Oregon here for 26 years, in a way that I haven't seen it. And so that's been a specific focus. It's right now, a lot of the legislators that are working on this are actually going out to school districts in the next month to go spend time to see special education classrooms and to talk to student service directors and including them to be visiting Sherwood, and which is great.
Thank you for that. So here's our resources projection for next year. So these columns here are 23-24 actual, 24-25 budget, and 25-26 projection. So these are not our actuals for 24-25, they're our budget. So we're looking at about a 4.4% just general fund increase from the prior year. We're looking at our levy going up 7.1% from budget, but remember we brought in about 160 grand more than budget. So we're not looking at that big of a jump, but we still think we'll bring in $6.4 million plus next year in that for a total of 73 million in operating revenue. Our ending fund balance jumped quite a bit from budget. You remember our actual in 24-25, you probably don't remember, but I remember it's $2.4 million, so quite a bit higher than we budgeted. So we won't see a 35% increase in our fund balance, but we should see an increase in our fund balance. That's all good news. See that. I did want to talk about enrollment for a couple minutes. So this is a chart that shows annual live births by zip code. All these zip codes draw from somewhat into our district. 97140 obviously is the main one that we draw from. But you can see this trend of declining birth rates. And so the kids who were born in 2020 will start school in kindergarten in 25-26. So one thing we're worried about enrollment is next year is a particularly low birth year. And if you look over time, you can just see this kind of sliding downward trend. It's true in all the zip codes, not just ours. But that produces some challenges for schools because I talked about this earlier. Here's just some historical data and some projections. I'll walk you through what this is. We had a senior class exit of 438 and a kindergarten class come in with just 243 students in it. So that's 195 kids we've got to make up. It's just half a school. And so this column over here, this far right column, this cohort growth rates from 24 to 25, what that is this kindergarten class in 23-24, 273 kids became 292 kids in first grade. So that cohort grew by 19. This first grade class went from 277 to 296, so that cohort grew by 19. So here's our growth rate of our cohorts by 1 year. So in grades, other than kindergarten, we added 128 kids, but it wasn't enough to make up for the 200 kids we lost out of the gate. So, and just so you know, high schools regularly decline. This is not just a Sherwood High School thing, this is an all high school things. Kids start to struggle with school and they move to online coursework. Some graduate early. There's a bunch of things that drive that.
Schools in that trimesters traditionally have way more students get done early and begin their next steps, their next adventure, whether it's a job, college, you name it. And so trimesters typically see that students have earned enough credits and they're done early. And so they count as part of this. So it's good because people probably don't know that.
So just making some purely mathematical projections, which have proven to be pretty accurate in the past. I took a 3-year average of cohort growth and then just a 1-year average of cohort growth and just compared the two numbers. And so just the straight math says if we grow at the same pace we did over 3 years, we'll have about 4,500 kids next year and drop about 57 kids. I used the same number as kindergarten for this year, even though our birth rates are a little bit lower. But interestingly enough, our kindergarten registration for next year is tracking about where it was the year before. So we'll see how that goes, but maybe some people redshirted their kids. I just don't know. Kindergarten's a tough grade to project because
We just said our options.
yeah, and you or you had a baby in Tigard and moved to Sherwood.
Yeah.
It's a hard one to project. Or potentially 45-26 if you take the 1-year average. And so on the next slide, I compiled some stuff together, kind of compresses this data and adds our demographer forecast. Interestingly enough, they're telling us we'll be 45-81. And they're telling us our elementary is going to shrink. And our middle school and high school are going to grow. And that just doesn't fit our typical pattern, honestly. Our typical pattern has been that our elementaries, at least in the last couple of years, have been growing. And it looks like that may be the case next year. Our middle schools kind of stay the same. Our high school, as you can see, has been decreasing in numbers. So I don't know what the enrollment number will be. It's really hard to project. And it's not super important for budget this year because of what we talked about on this slide. Schools are funded based on the number of students we have. It's a weighted average based on who the kids are and what services they bring with them. But schools are funded either on the higher number of the prior year or the current year.
So we can use this year if we need to.
So we've built our budget based on this current year enrollment, because that's the most conservative approach. If we happen to grow from there, great, we'll take that extra revenue, we'll decide who we need to hire, we'll move forward with that. But we don't want to be caught again in a situation where we're anticipating growth and then don't get it. Especially with numbers like these, which to me don't give me any real strong sense that we're gonna grow. So here's the transfers that we talked about. The first two are really operating transfers. That's what it costs us to operate our nutrition services. All districts have to subsidize their nutrition services departments. G is doing an amazing job of reducing how much we have to do that by just giving great menu options and increasing participation, coming up with different ways to earn more revenue. And she's doing an amazing job, but there's still a contribution there. And athletics just costs a lot of money. And Katie's doing an amazing job of holding, Miss Hartman is doing an amazing job of holding this budget together, considering she's dealing with really high, her costs are going up. Things like officials have almost doubled in cost in the last 2 years. She had a grant expire for a trainer that they have to now absorb the whole cost of the trainer, and so she's really kept this number in check. We gave them 600,000 this year and they were able to make it work, and it's tight, but she's doing a good job. The other two are truly transfers to save money for capital projects or put money towards capital projects. To the tune of about $600,000. $1.455 million transferred out of the general fund for other purposes.
Gary,
Yes.
right, are those transfers sustained? Are we gonna look to increase those transfers over the next few years, or is?
Yes, in
that kind of
fact,
the level that we're,
well, nutrition services. So nutrition services is an interesting one in that there is a possibility, and I think maybe a decreasing possibility, that the entire state goes to free breakfast and meals for students across the state of Oregon. Right now, it's like 90% of schools. It's really high. Sherwood does not qualify for that. If we qualify for that, we probably come closer to breaking even and be able to reduce that transfer. I think athletics will remain at a reasonably high level, and we're going to be tight to only increase that by $30,000 to $50,000 a year. I think is going to be tight. The curriculum technology fund and the church replacement fund, those were at 400 and 100 this year, and we increased it by 50 grand a piece. And so that is my thinking, at least. I don't get to approve the budget, but that's my thinking, is that we continue to increase those each year so we get a bigger line item in our budget and save more money for those projects.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but part of our athletic number is that we also keep our athletics fairly low compared to other districts.
Our rates are low compared to districts around us.
Doesn't always feel like that when you go online to pay, you're like, can't believe it costs this, but if you don't know, districts around us charge actually quite a lot more. So. Fortunate.
And we will keep doing a good job of staying up with what's appropriate, what works for Sherwood.
Yeah.
But we begun those conversations as well.
Sorry.
It's fine. So that takes us to our expenditure proposals. You can see just the salary cost increase with our current salary agreements and just basically the same staff at 7.3%. The payroll cost at 9.7%, that's largely driven by PERS, that big boost. Purchase services, our budget honestly just has not been, we did not budget enough money in 24-25 for purchase services. Those prices have gone up. We sort of flat funded the budget and we were not able to sustain it at that level. In fact, we'll overspend that budget in this current year. That would be the boiler breaks, irrigation breaks. It could be anything from any kind of service we purchase. And as you know, if you've done any improvements around your house, the prices of those services have just gone through the roof. And so we bumped that up significantly. It looks like the supplies and materials numbers going down a little bit and the capital outlay is going down. That was really a budget issue in 24-25, where we had some software that by some new accounting rules, some new GASB rules need to be reported as capital leases. And so we budgeted for them in supplies and materials, but we actually expended them in capital outlay. Those will come down to the capital outlay, and you can see what we spend in capital outlay in 23-24. So those changes are really just a reflection of those. It's not that we're increasing those that significantly. And really the only thing we're budgeting for is those from capital outlay is mainly those software subscriptions that now have counted as treated as a lease, essentially a long-term lease and a long-term plan. And this takes us to sort of the summary page. Oops, I lied to you. These are the grants I referred to that are putting some pressure on us. The student investment account is our largest grant we receive. It supports a lot of staff in the district. And we're receiving a little bit less in funding next year than we are this year. And when you take apart the cost of maintaining the current service, that acts as a pretty significant reduction to us. The High School Success Act, Major 98, we're getting a little bit more money from that. But that is a grant where we can't supplant, meaning that we cannot take somebody who's already on our payroll and move them to Major 98. We have to only add new positions to that grant. That's the way the law works. So even though we have $45,000 more there, we'll be able to hire somebody to do some extra work, but we won't be able to hire somebody who's already on our payroll. So that would be an added position. And then we had a PE teacher grant, which paid us for one of our new PE teachers. We had to add some PE teachers to meet our PE minutes. And it was a 1-year grant, and so that goes away. And so that person then has to come into the general fund. And then when our federal grants were appropriated by Congress, they were all appropriated by Congress this year in an act, but not Title II professional development. And so that one is on the chopping block and could be cut by executive order. We anticipate that likely to happen. We don't know that, but that's what most people are thinking. So there's some pressure, and all of those costs they're either things that we need to not do anymore, or we need to move those to the general fund.
Student investment account, are we receiving less because of our enrollment names?
Partially because of our enrollment numbers, but everybody's enrollment's down, and it's there's something else going on there. There's been a lot of questions among business managers in that they funded it at the current service level calculation is what they said they did. But the corporate activities tax has brought in more money than the current service level would. So nobody knows what's happening with that. But this is the allocation we've been given by ODE is this funding. So it's possible that goes up, but we just don't know. And there's been a lot of email chat among business managers, but more speculation than anything solid.
Gary, is it in statute that money has to go to schools, or is that just the current policy? So if there was excess revenue collected under that tax, like, do they have license to put that somewhere else?
So I think I know the answer to this question. I think it is in statute that that's for the schools, but they can spend on a lot of different things with their schools. They could fund early childhood programs, they could fund things of that nature. They can, some of that corporate activities tax pays for Major 98. And so I don't think there's a specified amount that has to go to the student investment account. When it was first allotted, it was 50% though, but I don't know that that's in statute. That's the part I don't know. Okay, now we're getting to the summary slide. So this is the slide. So if we just look at this top section and we just look at our operating revenue versus our operating expenditures, we're looking at a deficit of about $2.2 million. And that assumes none of this stuff from the state happens and we do the programming that's in the budget, which is essentially the same as last year. And then there's some additional revenue possibilities. I don't think the column on the far left is as likely to happen as I did at one point in time, where we would get both the high cost disability fund, the sped cap, the PERS debt relief, and the legislature just kind of kindly tucks another $100 million into the state school fund for us, which they sometimes do at the end. That's not an uncommon thing. If we were in that situation, we'd actually have a nice surplus that we could choose to save, invest, whatever we choose to do with it. Scenario one just takes out the extra $100 million to the state school fund and assumes we get the PERS rate relief, which I think is pretty much a done deal. And both of the sped things. I think the most likely scenario, the scenario we've been gaming around, is probably this scenario number 2, where we get one of the 2 sped things and the PERS rate relief. And that's honestly a number we can work with pretty well. We've got some expiring contracts that we can let go around kids in out of district placements and things like that, which we don't think we'll need for next year. And we're looking at some other things to reduce some district level contracts as well. So we're hoping if we get in that scenario, we can do it and kind of hold serve with where we are and address some of the challenges we have. There may be some shifting of staff as kids move, but that's what we know. And we're just kind of.
So is that deficit then kind of what you're expecting, or are you still modeling that and say, if we plan kind of scenario 2, we have a smaller deficit than the worst case scenario?
Yeah, we're sort of modeling and gaming scenario 2. I think that's what we'll build our budget around. And then, you know, one thing that's always a challenge about building budgets in legislative times is we have to build our budget before the legislature creates theirs. And so, you know, this is where we build a budget for what we think And the minute I get home, the minute we all get home, the day after the budget's passed, it's out of date. And you have to rely on us to manage the budget to what actually comes in, so that's what we're currently gaming is scenario 2.
And then just to clarify, because I know that sometimes, so with everything that's gone on, people see this and, oh, the district is running a deficit. This is Salem not funding schools or not increasing school revenue in line with how costs have increased. It's not us.
I would say that's accurate, yes. And we will not. My thought is we will not run at a deficit, because if we hit scenario 2, we'll make some kind of painless around the edges reductions, we'll put the screws to people on supplies and materials, and we'll be in a pretty good position. So I don't think the sky's falling, I don't think it's time to panic. I think it's time to watch closely what happens in the legislature and manage the budget carefully. Okay, so in my remaining 3 minutes. 2 minutes, oh, that clock is slow, isn't it? Been watching that clock. Oh, all right, well then luckily all I have is a timeline. So here's our timeline, we are on April 14th, you are all at the budget committee update. The next economic forecast comes out May 14th, that is the number that will set the budget for the state on how much money they have to fund, and that will set the legislature in action, putting their final touches on things. May 19th, we have our official budget committee meeting, where we'll review the budget, vote on approval. If it passes, we won't meet again. If it doesn't, there's another one scheduled for the 21st. And then we have the budget adoption hearing scheduled for June 2nd. Questions or comments? I'm gonna fix that clock, because I don't think I'm gonna be early.
On behalf of our team, I just wanted to say thanks, first of all, to you as community and board members, just for your time and energies and your support. I also want to thank our fiscal accountability team, who provides an additional layer of conversation and oversight, which I am greatly appreciative for. And lastly, and they're all of equal value, is Gary's stewardship and his leadership with our team. It is just for this group to be aware, highly focused part of our attention together. And we are student driven, but we want to have a shared mission to do it the right way, which often can be puts us in some good and hard conversations. And I would like to do a lot with what we have, but also have a good plan ahead. And so even like last summer, when I first got the job, there were some things pressing. I was like, oh, if we could just do this, this, and this. And Gary and our team were rightfully like, okay, yes, and let's be smart about that. And that was really beneficial, because we were so far off with where the demographers had guessed. And it's not their fault, but they haven't been able to get it right in the last couple of years, right? So Gary's number was way closer. We're going his number and more conservative. So I just want to say thank you to Gary and his team. And I know you agree, but I just wanted to publicly say.
I feel the same, Gary. I know we have to close, but as someone who's sat here and seen our budget be all over the place, when I see a deficit of $600,000, I feel almost nothing about that, because I do trust so wholeheartedly that the district will manage the resources correctly at this point. And I know that you'll have conversations with us every step of the way about where the money's going and what your thought process is. And so just that level of trust, knowing how we function and look at our budget, goes a long way. I mean, I don't feel nervous about that at all. I know we will make a decision.